Hi everyone, welcome to my channel Bibbidi Bobbidi Books. My name is Ellie and this is going to be a reading vlog for The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is going to be filled with spoilers, so I hope that's okay. I would recommend clicking off this video and coming back after you've read the book or seen the movies if you don't want to hear any spoilers. But I feel like it's a pretty well-known story now, so hopefully it's okay to discuss some spoilers and things. But yeah, I'm just so excited to delve back into this world and in this story. It's been a long time since I've read these books and I feel like my reading tastes have changed quite a lot and matured, so I'm interested to see sort of how I feel about it now I'm a bit older, and also to just kind of compare and contrast to the movies because I'm a big fan of the movies. And I'm actually going to be listening to it on audio as well because I've heard some fantastic things about the audiobook, which is narrated by Andy Serkis, who of course was the voice of Gollum. So I'm very excited to hear his performance. I have listened to his version of The Hobbit and I really enjoyed it, but I haven't listened to his version of the 3 Lord of the Rings books. So yeah, I'm very, very excited. So let's jump into it. So I have actually started my day today out on a beautiful walk, and it is honestly such a vibe for listening to The Lord of the Rings. So I've been listening to it on audio, I've started it, and I've basically just listened to the prologue so far, but the prologue is pretty long and it honestly listens like a history book. It's basically Andy Serkis telling me all about the hobbits and their history and all about the Shire and Hobbiton. And honestly, the first time that I read this book, I felt very overwhelmed by all the information, and I still do a little bit. A lot of it is going over my head, but I'm just really appreciating the amount of time and effort that went into creating this whole world and this basically this folklore for us and all of this history, and it's just so rich and detailed and I really appreciate that. And it's been such a vibe listening to it whilst walking through the English countryside across the grassy fields and everything. I literally feel like I'm in the Shire. It's the perfect day for it. It's beautiful and sunny, and just hearing about the babbling brooks and about, you know, these hobbit creatures and where they live and their lifestyle and their history, and it's just perfect listening for whilst I'm walking outside. So I've been really enjoying it so far, although it is a little bit intense, the amount of information, and I am excited to kind of kick on with the story now. So yeah, I'm very much looking forward to jumping into the first chapter and actually hitting the road with the main storyline. But yes, enjoying it so far, can't wait to carry on. Hey everyone, so it's a little bit later and I wanted to check in with you and give you a reading update because I have actually read quite a bit now. I've just finished chapter 8, so I've made a good dent into this book, and the first book isn't actually that long, I don't think. So I'm doing pretty well and I'm really enjoying it. So as I mentioned earlier today, the prologue is very info heavy. It's basically J.R.R. Tolkien giving us an essay about hobbit life, their smoking habits, where they live, all of this information just to give you, I don't know, I guess background into these creatures and where they're from and what they like and how they are. And it's really interesting, but it is a lot of information. And then the first chapter, we jump straight in at Bilbo's 11th birthday. So it's his big birthday party, and it's pretty much like the movie. It's building up this idealistic view of hobbit life. You know, they love a party, they love drinking, they love eating, they love giving presents to each other. And I guess it's to show us how peaceful and lovely life is in the Shire, and I guess what could be lost if things go wrong in the books. And yes, the hobbits have their little bickers between them, but it's never over anything too serious. So yeah, I loved the party scene. I loved when Gandalf showed up and they had the fireworks display, and it was just beautifully described. And then of course we had the moment when Bilbo disappeared. So he makes his birthday speech, he puts on his ring and he disappears, and he's kind of pulling a prank, I guess, on the rest of the hobbits. And he basically wants to retire. He wants to leave the Shire and to go and see mountains again and go on his last adventure. So he kind of disappears off, and we see just before he leaves kind of this first moment of the ring and how powerful and evil the ring is, because there is this moment just as he's about to leave when he really struggles to give up the ring. So he has decided that he's going to leave everything to Frodo, who is his cousin and his heir. But when it comes to leaving him the ring, he finds himself really struggling to do that. He keeps putting it back in his pocket, and Gandalf has to get really scary. You know, the wizard Gandalf has to come and he has to like shout at Bilbo basically to make him leave the ring to Frodo, and it's quite intense actually. And you see Bilbo's character really change, because he's quite a jolly fellow, and then when it comes to this point when he's having to give up the ring, he becomes really quite aggressive and uncharacteristically mean, and it just shows how powerful and manipulative the ring is, and it's quite a scary moment. And we also see fear from Gandalf as well, which I feel like makes you think the ring is even more scary, because if Gandalf is scared of it, if Gandalf doesn't want to touch it, he says, no, don't give it to me because I will be tempted by this power. It's obviously a big deal. So I really enjoyed that scene. And I just like this kind of idea that it's a follow-on from The Hobbit. So, you know, in The Hobbit, Bilbo had his adventure, which involved the ring, and now he's passing the ring on to Frodo, and Frodo is now taking on this quest. I don't know, it just feels quite nice, like a passing on of the baton. One thing that I didn't remember in the books from the first time that I read it is that it's 20 years between when Bilbo leaves the Shire to go on his retirement and when Gandalf comes back to Frodo and tells him about the ring and begins Frodo's quest. Like, there's a 20-year gap between Bilbo leaving and, you know, during that time Frodo is just casually living in the Shire and Gandalf has just gone off to gather more information. So that's just something that I didn't remember, and it's just interesting, isn't it, to think that Gandalf left Frodo, and in that time he was gathering information and everything that he could know and learn about this ring, and then he comes back to Frodo and he throws the ring in the fire and sees the writing around the edge and is like, yes, this is the one ring, this is what I feared. And then we get a lot of exposition about the ring and also about Smeagol and Gollum. And I thought it was really interesting seeing Frodo's opinion of Gollum when he's first being told about this creature, because he can't understand why Bilbo and Gandalf showed him any kind of pity, because he just thinks that from what is being described, from what he's done, that he is just a disgusting, horrible creature, and how could you ever feel sorry for such a thing? And I just find that quite interesting, because I don't remember that from the first time reading this book, and all I remember is that obviously later in the books it's always Frodo that stands up for Gollum and feels sorry for him. So yeah, it's interesting to see how that changes as he comes to understand the ring and how it can corrupt you later in the books. Is this camera shaking a little bit? I'm really sorry if it is. It's perched on top of a plant pot and if there's any wind it wobbles a bit, so I'm sorry about that. But anyway, then Frodo and the hobbits, they set off on their quest. They want to leave the Shire because it's no longer safe for them to stay there, and they head off across the Shire. And what I like about the books that is very different from the movies is that it's actually a long time before they even leave the Shire. Like in the movies, I think we jump to the prancing pony quite early on, whereas in the books, we spend more time kind of walking through the fields of the Shire, seeing the countryside, going through the creepy old woods. Like there was this really cool scene where they're in this old forest and this old willow tree, like kind of enchants them and sends the hobbits to sleep, and then tries to like trap them in its trunk, and they end up getting saved by Tom Bombadil, who of course isn't in the movies. So if you haven't read the books, Tom Bombadil is this larger than life character. He's very jovial and jolly. He's always singing. He wears this big hat with this big feather in it, and he is kind of like a green man. I don't know if that's where J.R.R. Tolkien got his inspiration for the character from, but that's how I see him. He kind of symbolizes nature and life itself, and is like very good. And I have mixed opinions about Tom Bombadil. I find his character a little bit annoying. And bless, Andy Serkis is an amazing voice actor, and I really appreciate that he does all the singing and everything in these books, because there are a lot of songs that the hobbits sing and that Tom Bombadil sings. But my goodness, the singing of Tom Bombadil in this book really started to grate on me after a while, and I can definitely see why they cut him from the movie. But yeah, we're introduced to his character, and one thing that I do think is interesting about Tom Bombadil is that he doesn't seem to be affected by the ring. There was this scene where Frodo offered him the ring. No, I think Tom Bombadil asked to see the ring, and Frodo just gives it to him, which is very unlike Frodo, because he's normally very untrusting and unwilling to give over the ring, but he just passes it to Tom Bombadil, and Tom like makes a joke of it. He like holds it up to his eye, and he's like playing with the ring and stuff, which is really weird considering it's this like really powerful evil ring. But I guess it's just to show that he can't be corrupted by it, maybe because he is so pure and so good, and he symbolizes everything that is good about nature and things like that, maybe. So he can't be corrupted by power. And also Tom Bombadil is supposed to be kind of older than the world, older than anything. He's always just been. So I guess he's above all of this. But I just thought that was quite an interesting scene. But yeah, and then we've just been following the hobbits as they've been going through the Shire. There's one quite scary scene that isn't in the films, where they come across this standing stone, and then they are kind of trapped by this wight, I think it's called. So that was quite scary. But one thing that I found a little bit frustrating is that they were in this sticky situation, and then Frodo just sings Tom Bombadil's song, and Tom Bombadil comes along and saves the day. I just thought that was a bit of a shame, because it would have been nice to have seen Frodo and the hobbits using some initiative and like finding their own way out of the situation rather than relying on him. But yeah, what I do like about this story though is that we have had a decent amount of time with the hobbits traveling through the Shire and seeing their friendship, because friendship is something that's at the heart of these stories and is something that I really love about the Lord of the Rings books. And it's really lovely seeing their interactions together as they're traveling, they're singing together, and they're just having, you know, a little adventure for the first time. And it's really nice to see. There was this really sweet moment where Frodo was quite anxious because he felt like he was going to have to leave his friends and go off on his own. He didn't realise how much his friends already knew about the ring and about the situation that he is in. And then, you know, when it comes to it, he's about to have this conversation with his friends, and they beat him to it and they say, Frodo, we know all about the ring. We know how dangerous it is. We know that you can't stay in the Shire. We know that you have to take it somewhere. And get it away from here, and we're going to follow you on this journey. And it's just a really beautiful moment. And there was a really lovely quote from Sam, who is obviously Frodo's best friend, and it was really sweet, so I'm just going to read it to you. "Don't you leave him," they said to me. "Leave him?" I said. "I never mean to. I am going with him if he climbs to the moon. And if any of those Black Riders try to stop him, they'll have Sam Gamgee to reckon with," I said. And I just think that's so sweet, and just such a moment where you see how loyal right from the beginning Sam is to Frodo. And it's kind of sad because, you know, I know, because I've read the books before and seen the movies, I know how perilous their journey is, and seeing them right at the beginning when they're kind of positive and optimistic and, you know, they're like, no, we're going to do this, and you just think, oh, you have no idea what's in store for you and what's to come. But yes, there we have it. So that's where we are at, and I think the next chapter that I'm about to read is going to be set at the Prancing Pony. So I think we might meet Aragorn there. From memory, so that'll be interesting, and we're going to leave the Shire. So yes, that's where I'm at so far, and I will keep you posted with my thoughts and feelings as we continue on through the book. Hey everyone, so it is the next day and I've been working all day today, but I have now finished and I've come straight outside because it's another beautiful day today. It literally feels like summer and I want to make the most of it because I know that it probably won't last. So I've gone ahead, I've poured myself a drink in a tankard because it feels fitting to drink out of a tankard when we're talking about Lord of the Rings. And I'm excited to catch you up because I've done a fair bit of reading since my last update. So I have now finished part 1 of the Fellowship of the Ring. So I've read the first 12 chapters. It's actually split into 2 halves. And yeah, quite a lot has happened. So the last time that we spoke, we'd basically been following Frodo and the gang. So Frodo, Sam, Merry and Pippin, the 4 hobbits, as they'd been travelling across the Shire and they were being pursued by the Black Riders, who are basically the servants of Sauron, who is the big bad, who is after Frodo's ring. And they've been making their way through the Shire to get to a place called Bree because they want to meet Gandalf the wizard at the Prancing Pony, which is a inn at Bree. So yeah, now they have made it to Bree and they've gone into the Prancing Pony, but Gandalf isn't there. He's nowhere to be seen. And we end up meeting Aragorn, of course, but he's known as Strider at this point in time. He has many names and the people of Bree know him as the Ranger Strider. And he's basically acting all edgy. He's sitting in the corner with his hood up, you know, being all mysterious, and the hobbits aren't sure whether or not to trust him, but he seems to know what's going on. He seems to suspect that Frodo isn't who he says he is because Frodo is telling everyone that his name is Underhill, it's his alias. And Strider basically says, hey, you might want to rein your friends in a little bit because they're getting a bit carried away. And it's true, Merry and Pippin had been sort of letting their hair down a little bit since arriving at the Prancing Pony. They'd had a few beers and have started chatting to the locals, and they're very trusting hobbits. And I think both Merry and Pippin don't really fully understand the scale of the situation and the stakes at this moment in time. So they're not really doing a very good job at keeping their cover story, and they're chatting away and they're talking about Shire and Bilbo Baggins' party. And that is a big no-no because they don't really want to draw attention to themselves, and they shouldn't be bringing up the name of Baggins because the Black Riders know they are after Frodo Baggins. So in an effort to distract everybody, Frodo decides to get up and sing a song, and it works initially, but then he ends up putting on the ring and disappearing at the end of the song. And obviously that causes a massive stir and is the worst thing that he could have possibly done, because now everybody's going to be talking about this forever and the Black Riders are probably going to catch wind of it. And yeah, it's really interesting because I think that's the first time we see the ring kind of exerting its influence on Frodo. So Frodo, right from the moment that he stepped into the Prancing Pony, actually had this desire to put on the ring, and he had kind of resisted it at first, but it just happens at the end of his song, and it's very much a case of the ring sort of making him do that subconsciously. And it's the first time that we see that it can actually sort of do things for itself, and it really wants to be found. So it wanted Frodo to put on the ring so that people would see him disappear, so that there would be this rumour, so that he would end up getting captured, because the ring wants to return to Sauron. It wants to be found by the Black Riders. So yeah, that's the first time that we see the ring actually doing something, which is quite interesting. And yeah, then the hobbits basically end up teaming up with Strider. So they find a letter that Gandalf left them at the Prancing Pony explaining, well, it doesn't explain much, it's quite mysterious, but Gandalf basically apologises that he's not there and says, hey, if you see someone called Strider, you can trust him. So the lot of them, the 5 of them now, they end up on the road again, because the Black Riders come to Bree and they're forced to flee. So they run away and they're back on the road and they're traveling along with Strider, who's doing his cool ranger stuff. He's like telling them about the lay of the land and all of this. And then we have the scene that's quite memorable from the movies where the Black Riders actually end up catching up with Frodo and the gang. And it's the first confrontation, and Frodo can't resist putting on the ring, and that makes him light up like a Christmas tree to the Black Riders who can see him, and they attack him. One of them stabs him through the shoulder, and Frodo retaliates and he stabs him in the foot, I think it is. And yeah, that all happens really quickly. It's kind of like a flash in the pan, which surprised me the first time that I read this book, and it had the same effect this time round. In the movie, there's a lot more tension and a lot more time dedicated to that moment, whereas this is literally over so quickly. And at first, I couldn't really understand why the Black Riders didn't just take Frodo and the ring there and then. But I think from having a bit more context, they were sort of surprised that Frodo was able to injure one of them. They weren't expecting that. And I think it's because Frodo has some kind of magical sword. So he was actually given a sword by Tom Bombadil. I think I forgot to mention that, but he was given this sword and it actually pierces one of the Black Riders. And that's really unusual because most weapons have no effect on them. So I think that really caught them by surprise. But also Frodo shouts Elbereth. I think it's right after he stabs one of the Black Riders. And forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think Elbereth is kind of like a deity that the elves worship, some kind of deity of light. And I think the name frightens the Black Riders. And so, yeah, the mixture of the two things, the fact that Frodo was actually able to injure one of them, the fact that he shouts Elbereth, and that kind of shows that he is in kinship with the elves, all of those things they weren't expecting, so they retreat. And I think that's why it happens so quickly. But yeah, it does feel a little bit anticlimactic, the fact that they finally catch up with the gang and it's kind of over really quickly. But yeah, it's interesting because I think a lot of the poems and things like that I have previously glossed over, whereas it's been really nice listening to Andy Serkis telling the poems and things. So for a lot of the time when the hobbits are on the road with Strider, he will tell them these poems and these stories. And actually there is important lore within those poems and stories. There's important world building that you can easily miss if you skip over them. For example, there is mention of Elbereth in some of these stories. So you do kind of have to pay attention to all of the little details. And it very much feels like Tolkien created this whole world, and the story that we're listening to or following along with just so happens to take place in this world. It's almost second to the world because there is so much history, there's so much wider context, there's so much mythology and everything that is already kind of there, and there's hints to it throughout the world. So for example, one thing that I quite like about watching our gang traveling through, you know, the wilderness is that the environment itself is almost like its own character, because there's evidence of the history and everything within the world. So there's ancient ruins, and it's not just random, they're ruins from actual, you know, battles and things that you hear about in some of the stories. And so the terrain itself tells us about the world and about the history and the previous battles and all of this. So yeah, it's really interesting, and I would encourage you to pay attention to those details if you are reading or listening to the story, because you'll get so much more out of it if you do. Anyway, after Frodo gets stabbed and injured and everything, the Black Riders retreat, and Strider and the hobbits are back on the road again, fleeing to Rivendell, where Strider thinks that they will be safe. So Rivendell is like a city, an elven city full of light, and it's supposed to be, you know, one of the only places that is safe from these dark creatures. So they're back on the road again, Frodo is injured, and then we have that scene where they're at a river and they're having to cross it. It's kind of a river at the border leading up to Rivendell, and they're trying to cross the river, but the Black Riders catch up to them again. And I was a little bit disappointed because in the movie, we see Arwen for the first time at this moment, and Arwen is the one that saves Frodo, and there's that really epic scene where she calls to the river and turns the river into these like gushing white horses that come down and flood the river, and that's what saves Frodo and everybody. But in the book, it's not Arwen that does that. In fact, it's not really clear who does that at this moment in time. I'm not quite sure what happened. But yeah, it's not Arwen that calls the river horses, which is a bit of a shame because I love that moment. It's so iconic in the movie. But what I do like about that scene is we see Frodo's strength. So in that moment, Frodo is standing, I think, across from the river, and the Black Riders are flanking the other side of the river, and they're about to cross over. And Frodo stands there, even though he's injured, even though he's being called towards them and has this compulsion to take the ring to them. He stands his ground and he raises his sword and he tells them to back off. And it's just a really cool moment for him because it just shows his strength. And I really appreciated that moment. But yeah, then the river floods. You get the white horse waves coming, you know what I mean. And the Black Riders get swept away, and then Frodo passes out, and that is the end of part 1. So that is where I'm up to. I am obviously really enjoying it, having a great time. And I'm just excited to get to Rivendell because I love that city, and I'm excited to meet some elf characters. And yeah, anyway, I'm going to enjoy this drink. I'm going to sit out here, probably do some more reading, and I'll catch you up when I've next got some things to say. Thanks for listening. Hey everyone, it's been a little while since I last updated you, so I thought I'd better pop on here and give you an update. I have had such a lovely afternoon sitting up here doing some painting. So I decided to have a go at painting the Shire and Hobbiton, and listen, I am not an artist, okay, but I've been having a grand old time sitting here playing with some paints, and this is my painting so far. We have the sky, we have the grassy hills, we have some trees, a river, and of course little hobbit homes. So yeah, I'm having fun. It's obviously not finished. I need to like make it look a bit better, put in some details and stuff. But I find painting so relaxing. So it's definitely a hobby that I want to get more into, and I would love to look up some tutorials of how to actually do it properly. But anyway, I've been having a lovely time sitting here doing some painting, and I have been listening to the audiobook, and I am now pretty far through. So I'm up to page 332. So I only have a little bit left. So I'm hoping to finish it later today. And yeah, I wanted to give you an update. So last time I spoke to you, I think the hobbits had just arrived at Rivendell, which is this elven city. And when they're there, they're reunited with Bilbo Baggins, who has been staying there. And Bilbo passes Frodo his sword called Sting, and also his chainmail, which is made of mithril. And he gives those over to Frodo, which is another lovely moment of him sort of passing on the baton and passing on the responsibility and the adventure from himself onto Frodo. So I liked that. We did have the moment where Bilbo asked to see the ring again, and we see this kind of creepy side to him. We see how it's kind of had an effect. He's like an addict almost, wanting to see the ring, and you know, when Frodo brings out the ring, he kind of looks different and it's creepy, and so that was quite cool. And then we had the big council of Elrond, which is this really long chapter, which is basically a giant meeting where everybody is discussing what to do with the ring. And we get a whole load of information thrown at us during that scene. A lot of exposition, a lot about the history of the ring, a lot about Gollum, a lot about everybody's opinions on what they should do and the way that the world is being changed and things, and kind of the threats that are popping up across the land from different people's perspectives. Not gonna lie, I did lose a little bit of concentration during that scene. I did find my mind was wandering a little bit. It was a little bit too much information thrown at me all in one go. And I don't know if that's intentional, because maybe it makes us as readers feel like how Frodo and the hobbits must feel, because I'm sure they would be feeling very overwhelmed as well. But yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I did kind of glaze over a little bit during that chapter, which is a shame. But yes, we had that long chapter, and the outcome was essentially that the ring needs to be destroyed. And so the Fellowship was created. So we have a bunch of volunteers who are going to go off with Frodo to destroy the ring. So of course we have Frodo and the other hobbits, the 4 hobbits. We have Aragorn, we have Gandalf, we have Legolas and Gimli and Boromir. So there's the 9 of them, and they set off on the road again, and we're following along with them. They eventually end up in the mines of Moria, and I loved the whole scene in the mines of Moria. I thought it was so atmospheric. Tolkien definitely does a fantastic job at writing environments. I think I said before that the terrain in these books is kind of like a character in itself, but he also just creates such atmosphere when he's describing places. Like in the mines of Moria, you can't actually see very much because it's very dark in there, but you still get a real sense for what it must be like to be traveling through the mines because of descriptions of things like the changes in the air temperature, the way the ground feels underneath their feet and how it changes, the way that sounds echo, you know, the sense of being in this vast cavernous space, even though you can't see the walls around you and how that can feel. And it was just so atmospheric. I loved all of the scenes in the mines of Moria. We then, of course, find out what happened to the dwarves in the mines of Moria. Gimli has a moment with the sarcophagus, is it? The like tomb with, is it I forget his name, but the king, the dwarf king that ended up dying. And then, of course, we have the orcs that come after them. And we had this really great scene where Frodo says, "For the Shire," and ends up stabbing a troll in the foot. There was this troll that's trying to break into the room, and Frodo stabs him, which just shows his bravery again. You know, you've got to remember that he's just a small hobbit with no fighting training or anything, but he still shows such strength and bravery. Frodo ends up getting impaled, and everyone thinks that he's dead, but he's not, because he's wearing the chainmail that Bilbo gave him, which is made of mithril, which is this kind of magical metal that's really durable. And I liked that as well. There's been a few times where Bilbo has actually kind of saved Frodo in a way, because if Bilbo hadn't have given him the chainmail, then Frodo probably would have died in that moment. And, you know, Sting, Bilbo's sword that he hands onto Frodo, has proved to be very useful as well. So I really like the fact that even though Bilbo isn't with Frodo, he's still helping him and he is still essential to the outcome. So I love that. We then, of course, have the iconic moment with the Balrog. So the gang are like being chased by orcs and being attacked by orcs. And then they're like, hang on a minute, why are the orcs acting weird? Why are they scared? What are they running from? Oh my goodness, it's a giant Balrog. And then, of course, we have the epic moment where Gandalf stands off against the Balrog and he is on the bridge across the cavern and he says, "You cannot pass," and kind of defeats the Balrog. The Balrog ends up falling into the cavern, but he also drags Gandalf with him because he has this whip that he uses to catch Gandalf's legs, and he ends up falling into the cavern as well. And that is the first big loss of the Fellowship of the Ring. They believe that Gandalf, you know, he can't survive that fall. And so there is this real sense of a loss of hope, because I feel like Gandalf really kind of symbolized hope. He was the leader of the group. He was the one that kind of picked everyone up and kept everybody going. And so there is this real loss after that moment, and the gang have to try and carry on. And that is where we're at so far. That is where I am. They have just left the mines of Moria, and I'm obviously really enjoying it. The audio narration continues to be fantastic. I love the way Andy Serkis, he does this sound effect for the drums that the orcs play as they're chasing them through the mines, and it was so creepy. I loved that. And I also just really appreciate how in the books we get a little bit more depth and complexity to the character of Gimli. So Gimli in the movie is basically there as the comic relief. That is kind of his sole identity in the movies, which is a shame because in the books he has a lot more complexity to him, and I really like that. So in the books we see him showing his intelligence. He has a lot of information to share and a lot to say. He's a great fighter. He's a really valuable member of the group. And we also see, some great moments of him in the mines where he's becoming emotional, finding out about what happened to his people, the dwarves that lived in the mine, and the fate of them. He's understandably really emotional. But we also see some moments where he shows kind of pride of being a dwarf, and he wants to show Frodo and the hobbits things that his people created, and that's just quite a nice thing. It's nice to see his character showing those different characteristics, I guess. So I really enjoy having a little bit more to that character. And yeah, I am now going to go and do some baking. I want to bake some banana bread. It's a bit cooler today, so I feel like that sounds like a nice cozy activity to do. So I'm going to go and do that and listen to the end of this book, and then I will check in with you with my final thoughts. So yeah, thank you so much for listening to me prattling on. I really appreciate having you here, and yeah, I'll catch up with you a little bit later.
Chapter 6 Lothlorien.
I did it. I finished The Fellowship of the Ring, and my goodness, did I have a fun time rereading this book. I'm so glad that I went back and read this one. I have just had a blast reading this story. So yeah, what can I say? The last time I updated you was when Gandalf had his standoff with the Balrog, and they both fell into the chasm, and then the remaining group left the mines, and they've been back on the road travelling, and they end up going to Lorien, which is this magical forest where the elves live. And my goodness, is Lorien the most whimsical, beautiful, captivating environment. It's definitely my favourite setting that we've been to so far in these books. And so I just wanted to give you a little read of the description because it's just so gorgeous. Frodo looked up and caught his breath. They were standing in an open space. To the left stood a great mound covered in a sward of grass as green as springtime in the elder days. Upon it, as a double crown, grew 2 circles of trees. The outer had bark of snowy white and were leafless but beautiful in their shapely nakedness. The inner were Malorn trees of great height, still arrayed in pale gold. High amid the branches of a towering tree that stood in the centre of all, there gleamed a white flet. At the feet of the trees and all about the green hillsides, the grass was studded with small golden flowers shaped like stars. Among them, nodding on slender stalks, were other flowers, white and palest green. They glimmered as a mist amid the rich hue of the grass. Over the sky was blue, and the sun of afternoon glowed upon the hill and cast long green shadows beneath the trees. Oh, I mean, come on, that's just absolutely stunning. But as always, these descriptions and this setting is kind of edged with a hint of sorrow and sadness, because that Lorien is going to fade away and that it's going to be lost. You know, if Frodo is successful and he manages to destroy the ring, unfortunately that means that everything the elves have built will also be destroyed, because, you know, they used the rings to create these places, and if you destroy the one ring, that means that the other rings will also lose their power. So, you know, you want Frodo to be successful on his quest, but you also see kind of the sacrifice that is being made, especially by the elves. You know, they are going to lose everything they worked hard to build, and it's so beautiful. And I also just feel like this is a kind of a breath, and it's probably the last moment really where we're going to see this beauty and this peace, because going on from here, the road is only going to get more and more perilous. So yeah, you have to appreciate this moment while it lasts, and I'm so glad that the gang had their respite there, and they had a moment to stop and to rest and to recuperate. So yeah, they spend a few days there, and they obviously meet Galadriel, who is one of my favourite characters. She is so interesting. I love the fact that she is both incredibly maternal and caring and loving, but also incredibly fierce and strong and kind of terrifying. She is such a juxtaposition of those two things, and you never quite know where you're at with her. But she just is so powerful, and she's so wise. She's obviously been around for thousands of years, and she actually has one of the rings. So the elves were given 3 of these powerful rings, so she has one of those. So she's very, very powerful. And we have this moment which is really scary in the movie actually, where she is confronted with the ring and she could take it from Frodo. So she has this moment and you see her become affected by it, and you know, she gives this speech about how she could use the ring and she could, you know, take its power and all of this, and it's really quite intense, but she doesn't do it. She passes the test, so to speak, and she you know, she isn't overcome by the temptation. So again, that really shows her strength, but it is a like scary moment. And then basically after the gang have had a few days to rest, they end up going back on the road again, and they're given several gifts by the elven people. One gift that I really liked was the gift that was given to Sam, which you don't see in the movie, but in the book Sam is given a little pot or a little container of elven soil. So the idea is that if he is able to return to the Shire one day, he can plant this soil in his garden and he can grow a little bit of the beauty of Lorien. And I just think that is so sweet. So I love that. And yeah, then the remaining members of the Fellowship end up going away on boats. So they're given boats by the elven people, they set sail, they're back on the road, and there's not much left of this book, to be honest with you. It kind of ends with, well, it ends with a chapter called The Breaking of the Fellowship, which tells you what to expect, really. And of course, we have the moment where Boromir confronts Frodo. So there have been quite a few moments peppered throughout the book where Boromir has shown, you know, a different point of view. He doesn't necessarily think the ring should be destroyed. And he finally has this moment where he has Frodo by himself and he is tempted to forcibly take the ring, and he confronts Frodo, and it's quite scary. He wants the ring for himself. Frodo slips away, he manages to escape, and as soon as he does slip away, Boromir instantly feels regret and feels sad for what he has done. So you know that it was the ring that was manipulating him. It wasn't necessarily entirely him. He was definitely being pulled by the ring and being manipulated. But Frodo sort of slips away, and I think that's a really important moment for Frodo, because he realizes that he's going to have to go at this alone. He can't trust anybody but himself. And, you know, he's seen quite a few people that he knows, that he respects, that he trusts, be affected by the ring. And so he's seeing, you know, how really it's only him that can take the ring. Everybody else, you know, can turn when they are confronted with the ring, and you know, he can't trust anyone, so he decides to slip away. He actually puts on the ring and disappears to escape the situation, which isn't a great thing to do because that means that Sauron can see where he is, but he ends up running away and going into a boat by himself. But of course, Sam, his best friend, realizes what he's doing and chases after him and ends up in the boat with Frodo. And so it is just the two of them, and the two of them end up going off together, and the fellowship is broken. And that is where this book finishes. My goodness, what a ride. So yeah, I obviously really enjoyed reading this book. I feel like it's a bit of a shame that I know the movies so well and that I watched the movies before discovering the books, because it means that it's almost impossible for me not to merge the two together in my mind and to kind of see scenes from the movie as I'm reading the book. And that is a little bit of a shame, because it would have been nice to have experienced the books first and to have been able to imagine it for myself before seeing an adaptation. But, you know, I do love the movies, and I think they have done a fantastic job at, you know, telling this tale. And I do also love the books. So yeah, I had a great time. I hope that you've enjoyed hearing me talking about these books. Please let me know if you would be interested in me doing a reading vlog for the other two books in the Lord of the Rings series. Would that be of interest to you or not? Let me know. As always, don't forget to like this video if you did like it, subscribe if you want to see some more from me, and I guess I'll see you next time with another video. Bye.